preaching to you for over a year on the sermons that we had planned to preach for a year. This is the 5th Sunday. I don't know whether this is going to be a series of sermons or this is just going to be one sermon. But this particular subject that is in this Psalms, it is a Psalms that need to be preached, because the writer of this Psalms can speak to the condition of all of us. Martin Lloyd-Jones says that this is a Psalms about spiritual depression. That's what Martin Lloyd-Jones says. This is a Psalms about spiritual depression. And it looks like those two words shouldn't go together, because how can a Christian be depressed? How can a Christian experience anxiety? How can a Christian even have any emotional and mental issues about life and about God? How can a person who has faith have any issues with depression, stress, and anxiety? But Martin Lloyd-Jones says that this Psalms can speak to the condition and the heart and the mental and emotional condition of Christians at some stage in your Christian walk with God. Let me go ahead and dispel the myth. And the myth is this, that Christians always have it together. That Christians can always hold it together. You may be seated, ushers. That Christians can always have a mental toughness even when they go through difficulties in life. Now listen, if you don't have any issues, this Psalms is probably not for you. But if as a Christian you've ever experienced some emotional, mental, psychological issues as you try to walk with God, or as you have tried to live your faith, this Psalm is a good prescription for you. Because you'll be able to see yourself in this Psalms, because this Psalm speaks to the fact that Christians can have emotional and mental issues while they live their faith, while they practice their faith, while they come to church, while they are singing for Jesus, praising Jesus, preaching for Jesus, or serving Jesus in the church. I need to tell you, my brothers and sisters, you can have a mental breakdown as a Christian. Do I have any witnesses in here? You can struggle emotional as a Christian, because the author of this particular Psalms is a person who believes in God, or persons who believe in God. These persons that are mentioned as the authors of this particular Psalms are going to be very notable. If you want to trace the roots of the writers of this particular Psalms, you have to go back to Numbers chapter 26, verses 1 through 6. And we have to give particular attention to who wrote this Psalms. And I want to kind of give that foundation, and I don't know whether I'm going to move beyond who wrote this Psalms, because that's very important when you understand who penned this Psalms, and not only who penned it, but when they penned it. And I really want to look at what their specific job was in the temple. These were not somebody's that were just on the outskirts of the temple. These were not people who were not believers in God. These were not persons who did not display faith in God. These were people who stood in the temple, and they were very important in the temple, and their job was important. But the persons who penned this text, man, they had some issues as they served God. What the text says is they were the sons of Korah. And my brothers and sisters, if you want to know who Korah is, you have to go back to the Old Testament, the book of Numbers. You remember when they were on their way out of Egypt, Moses was up in the mountain of God, Sinai, getting the commandments of God. In the meanwhile, Moses was taking a long time to get back down where the people were. And while he was up there and the people were waiting, Korah led a rebellion against Moses. This rebellion consisted of about 250 other leaders of those who had exited out of Egypt. And he led this rebellion, and he spoke against God, spoke against Moses, and God eventually, when Moses came back down, he judged Korah and the 250 men or leaders who followed him. God killed them all because Moses says, whoever's on the Lord's side, come over here. And those who came on the Lord's side were spared, but those who did not come were destroyed. And that was Korah and the 250 leaders who followed him in the rebellion against Moses. But all of the descendants of Korah did not die. What the text says, or this psalm says, is these are the descendants or the sons of Korah. They are the ones who were a part of the Levites. And you know who the Levites were. The Levites were the ones who led the worship of God for the people of God. Whenever they would get ready in a public worship service in the tabernacle, the sons of Korah, who were Levite, would lead the people in a praise and worship service. That's very significant because these were the people, or the men, the sons of Korah, these Levites. They would be the first to stand up before the congregation to sing praises to God. If you went to a tabernacle or a temple worship and you sat there to wait for them to read or to practice the rituals of the temple, you would first see the sons of Korah, these Levites, leading the worship. That's very important, my brothers and sisters. I'm trying to tell you that these were men who were the descendants of Korah. They were Levites. They led the praise and worship service. But these are the same men who are writing Psalms 42. They were leaders. They were Levites. They were worship leaders. These were men who had a close relationship with God. They were the ones who would lead the whole congregation in praise and worship. But yet, these are the men, are the sons of Korah, who are writing this particular Psalms. And my brothers and sisters, you got to really read it to understand just how mentally distressed they were, how mentally depressed they were, how much anxiety had overtaken them as they tried to serve God. Now, one of the things that Spurgeon says is that Psalms 42 and 43 go together. It's really one Psalms broke down into two stanzas or two divisions. And so you have to read Psalms 42 and 43 as if it is one Psalms with two stanzas. And so it is a continuation because Psalms 43, he starts out by saying, vindicate me, O Lord. And that word vindicate really means rescue me. I am in a situation where I need to be rescued. And my brothers and sisters, if you're not ever in a situation where you need to be rescued by God, you probably ain't running, living, or serving God. Do I have any witnesses in here? Because at some point, there's going to come a time in your life where you need to be rescued by God. Amen. It's going to come a time when life is going to be tough. The road is going to get tough. The hills are going to get hard to climb. And just like the sons of Korah, these Levites, these praise worshipers, you're going to have a time where you need God to vindicate you. To rescue you, to help you in your distress. And like I said, I don't know whether this is going to be a series or just one sermon. But I want to just look at this Psalms because this is about, according to Martin Lloyd-Jones, this is about spiritual depression. All of us get there at some point. I don't care how saved you are, how much you love the Lord, how much you give to the church, how much you give of yourself, and how much praise you express. There are times and will come times in your life where you will hit a low point. Do I have any witnesses in here? Now, am I talking to the right crowd? Because my brothers and sisters, there will come a time as a human being, and especially as a Christian, where it looks like you're looking up for God. And he's nowhere to be found. That you're crying out to God and it looks like He can't hear.
Yeah.
You're looking for God, and it looks like you're looking in vain.
Yeah.
It's going to look like that you need God to send a lifeline down,
Yeah.
and nothing is going to come. And boy, when you read this psalm, when you see the sons of Korah expressing themselves, these Levites, these worship leaders, this praise and worship team are in despair. Now, let me give you the context. The context is, many scholars believe that they were with David when David was ran out of Jerusalem. They were a long way from the temple. They were a long way from the palace. You remember, David was on the run because of Absalom. Absalom had tried to take his father's throne, cause an insurrection. Now, Korah, these Levites, were with David because David was running from Absalom. That's the context. So you got to understand that they were in distress with David, their king, their spiritual leader, the person that God had set on the throne. And now they were in distress. They were just feeling some kind of way because they were outside of Jerusalem. They were away from the temple. They didn't have the comfort of the palace. And now they are under distress. And that's the context, that they were out of Jerusalem. They was away from the temple. They were under the distress of having to run and hide from Absalom. They were worried about their king, and they wanted to be back into Jerusalem. They wanted to be back at the temple. Because if you read the entire Psalms, you will discover that they were in distress. They were really in exile. They were away from the house of the Lord. But you're going to discover in this particular Psalms that really what they wanted was not necessarily to be back in the temple, but what they wanted was to be back in the presence of the Lord. And I need to explain to you, there is a difference, because you can come to church and not have church. You can come to church and never experience the presence of God. You don't have to be at the church to experience the presence of God. And so the psalmist wanted to experience God's presence. He says, even if I can't get back to the house of the Lord, I sure want to be able to feel his presence. Do I have any witnesses in here? He says, if I can't get back to where I really want to be, and he says that in verse 4, in stanza number 4, he says, listen, I really want to be back at the house of the Lord. But if I can't get back, I at least want to be in his presence. And I don't have time because I really ain't got there yet, but I just wanted to explain to you that sometimes when you can't get to church, you need the church to get to you. Sometimes when you can't get the presence of God because you are restricted by sickness or illness or distance and space, even though you can't get to church, you sometimes want God to come where you are, and you want to experience God's presence. You long for God to come where you are, to touch you. This is what the psalmist is wanting to communicate. We are on the run with our king. We are away from the temple. We are away from the palace. And God, it looks like you have abandoned us. It looks like there is no hope for us. There is no help for us. We are in despair. Yeah, that's right. And so the psalmist pens this Psalms. And I just want to go down couple of verses with you. I don't know whether this is going to be a series about mental and spiritual depression, because let me tell you, in these times in which we live, I need to go ahead and tell you and give you permission and give you validation. It's a million things to be depressed about. Amen. Do I have any witnesses in here? Have we not been through a whirlwind of stuff? Trouble and trauma. And my brothers and sisters, if the truth be told, it doesn't seem like it's bad news on top of bad news after bad news, with bad news coming. And it almost looks like there is no light at the end of the tunnel. And if I had time, I'd explain to you, like some of us, we got trouble going on outside of us. We got trouble going on around us. But if the truth be told, the most trouble we got that's going on is in the inside of us. It's in our mind and in our hearts. The distress we feel, the depression that we feel, the spiritual anxiety we feel really ain't got nothing to do with what's going on around us, but it's what's going on in us.
Yeah. All right.
Because if the sink never clogged up, you still got some stuff going on in here that's clogged up.
Yeah.
If the refrigerator don't never tear up, listen, you got some stuff tore up in here. Listen, if stuff don't quit working, it's some stuff in you that has quit working. I'm just trying to tell you, this psalm, according to the Korah, his sons are going to express to you exactly what some of us are going through. Now let me stop parenthetically and explain to you. Just because you see a smile on my face don't mean it's a smile in my heart. Don't judge my condition by the outside countenance that I express when you see me in passing. Because sometimes what you see in my face is not what's going on in my heart and in the internal parts of my mind, and you can misjudge where I am emotionally and mentally by looking at the smile on my face. And I need to go ahead and tell you, sometimes the smile is hiding the pain. Sometimes the smile is hurting the anxiety, the stress, and all that I'm going through. It ain't what it look like. And then I'm going to try to help you be compassionate with people. Because see, you judge people because you think they doing all right because they got some stuff you ain't got. And they got some stuff you want. But if you could go home with them and see what they're really going through. You see, you didn't get to go to the doctor's appointment that they went to last week. You didn't have to sit down and talk to the baker that they had to explain that they need a little time because of the pandemic. They're under the stress. You didn't have the teachers meeting with the teacher that the student that is their child has caused them all kinds of distress. You're not trying to get along with your brothers and sisters that you really love, but they jealous of you, but you really just want to hang out with them. You really don't know. Let me give it to you in just a simple and expressive way. Is this: you don't know what's going on in both houses. You don't know the hell they live in, the hell they going through, and what they have to suffer when the doors are closed. So don't look at somebody's outside material possessions and their occupational success to determine that they are all right. Do I have any witnesses in here? Because there's some people, when the doors are closed, the lights are off, they are going through hell. If you had to see the tears that they had to shed. Josh Brown used to come to this church. He used to get up and sing a song. I cried my tear, my last tear. Listen, ain't no theology to that song. Ain't no truth to that. Listen, as long as you live in this world, it ain't no last tear.
Ain't no last.
It just ain't no last tear. You'll cry today, tomorrow. You just keep on living. And then listen, there's some stuff that'll make you cry. There's some people that'll make you cry. And listen, I'm just trying to really get into this text because I'm only just explaining verse 1. But let me tell you, don't judge because of the smile. Don't judge because of what you see me have, the things that I drive and living and the lifestyle that I enjoy to let you make a judgment that everything is perfect in my life. Do I have any witnesses in here? Because if you knew what I knew about what I was living in and living through,
Yeah.
All right.
so I just want to kind of, I don't know whether it's a series or just a sermon, but I think it's something worth exploring. Because Jordan Peterson says we live between the tension of pleasure and pain. We live between things going well and things that just make us want to give up, cry, and throw in the towel. I said, now listen, don't get too saved on me. Because all you want to quote is the 23rd Psalm where David said, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Yea, though I walk through the valleys, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff comfort me. You only read that part, but listen, David said something else. David said, if I had wings of a dove, I'd fly away from here and be at rest. He got so stressed out with life that the same person who said the Lord is my shepherd said if I had wings. And if I could put it in the black Negro way, it would be very vulgar and provocative. And he really said if I could get away from some of these folk that's getting on my nerves, if I could get away from some of these folk I've helped and now they don't appreciate what I've done for them, if I could get away from some of these folk that I have served and they are so unappreciative of what I have done for them, if I could get away from these unappreciative children, if I had wings, I would fly away and get some rest. I'm just trying to set this up to explain that you ain't as together as you think. And you ain't as together as we think. The smile, the nice car, the good job, the fancy clothes, the very accelerated professional career, that ain't what makes you happy. That's what keeps food on the table. And I just want to read this because, boy, verse 1 is so powerful. I'm at the stage in my life, 37 years of preaching, I'm a senior pastor, and I try to explain to guys, if you would read the verse in its context, so much meaning would bleed out of that text because I've read this verse many times before, but I didn't understand why Korah, this Levite, used this particular animal to describe how he felt and where he was in his particular ministry, at his particular stage, because this is what he says, and I'm just going to try to just read verse 1 and 2. I'm going to try. I think I'm just going to do verse 1. As the deer panteth for the brook, so panteth my soul for you, O God. Let us be seated. That's such a powerful statement because he decides to compare himself to a deer that panteth after a stream of water. The deer is thirsty. Now, I'm going to give you the two reasons in the text why historians and theologians say that he is thirsty. And you're going to get this, why he's given this emphasis, this illustration, because this is how most of us feel in this particular, and you're going to see, because listen, what you have to do sometimes in communicating a spiritual truth, you have to look out into the world. Dr. Christopher Davis of Memphis Theological Seminary, he talks about an imagination in preaching. In other words, there are lessons in life, in nature, that you can use to give a spiritual demonstration, a story, a lesson. And so what this particular, the sons of Korah do, they look out in nature, and what they see, they observe a deer, and they observe a deer in its natural habitat. And a deer is thirsty for water for two reasons. One reason why a deer is thirsty for water is because of drought. You'll get that in a minute.
Yeah.
That's one reason why a deer is thirsty, because of the heat of the day, because of the lack of rain, because of the dryness of the environment, and because of drought. The sun, the lack of rain causes drought. But another reason why a deer panteth after a flowing stream of water is because it has been pursued. If you've ever watched the Nature Channel, I don't know whether you like watching the Nature Channel, but whenever a gazelle, a deer, is pursued by a cheetah, he has to run, to flee, to get away from that cheetah. And if he is able to get away from that cheetah, if he's able to get away from that leopard, if he's able to get away from them African dogs, he is exhausted because he has used all of his energy to get away from the predator.
Yeah.
But he's always chased, so he's always thirsty. Drought is unpredictable, so he finds himself thirsty. And what the psalmist says, as the deer panteth after a flowing stream of water, so my soul panteth after you, O God. And so what the psalmist is saying, he says, I've observed a deer looking for water because of drought, but I've also observed a deer looking for water because he's being pursued by the enemy. In other words, all he's trying to do is eat grass, raise his children, and live in his herd, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the enemy comes and makes him have to flee. And because he's always under the pressure of being pursued by the predator, he finds himself physically and mentally exhausted.
Yeah.
And so in order to refresh himself, he needs to find a flowing stream of water. It's built in. The only way he can be refreshed, he doesn't need food, he needs water. Because it is 3 minutes without oxygen, 3 days without water, 30 days without food. So you can survive without food, but you can't survive without water. You need the refreshment of water so that your blood is able to sustain you, so that oxygen can flow through your veins, so that your lungs can breathe, your heart can pump, and it can cause your body not to be dehydrated. And dehydration causes your body to shut down, your organs to shut down, your sweat glands to shut down, and you will be rendered immobile.
Yeah.
Until you get a drink of water. Now listen, I need to give the illustration, the lesson that he's teaching, that sometimes because of the drought, do you have any witnesses in here?
Yeah.
You will become thirsty for God. Do I have any witnesses in here? And he's going to expound on the idea that he is experiencing this thirst for God and this drought of God in his life because of the droughtness of circumstances. In other words, there is no refreshing rainfall, and there is heat everywhere, and the wet places have dried up.
Yeah.
And so he goes in search of a stream in order to satisfy his thirst. I tell you, if you don't experience drought in your life, keep living. There can be some places you used to go to get refreshed, but them places will dry up because of circumstances in your life. Do I have any witnesses in here? Is there anybody in here that's ever experienced a drought?
Yeah.
You used to go places, and I have places where you could go get refreshed and renewed and so that you could stay off dehydration, but those places of refreshment have dried up, and they dried up because of the circumstances of life. There is nothing worse than having a place of refreshment and then that place dry up. Yeah. And when you go there, there is nothing. You go there with an expectation to be refreshed and to be rehydrated. Yeah. And the deer on the nature channels that I watch, they be going looking in pursuit of flowing streams. And they find none. So as the deer panteth after the water brook, but not only does this deer pant after the water brook because of drought, but because of predators. Y'all gonna make me shout it. Because if you don't experience this panning after the brook, or this pursuit of trying to find a brook because of drought, it's going to happen because of the pursuits. It's a lot of stuff that's trying to run you down and take you out. Now you do know that the cheetah wasn't pursuing the deer to have a conversation and to be playful. He wasn't pursuing the deer just to be friends and to have banter and conversation, but it was pursuing that deer to destroy it, so to devour it, to eat it, to take it out. And my brothers and sisters, there's some predators out there. And there's some predators out there that's pursuing you. There's some people out there, some circumstances, some problems, some difficulties that are pursuing you to take you out. They ain't trying to cozy up to you to give you any comfort, any refreshment, any leisure, but they are out there to take you out. And if you could tell the truth and confess today, it is some things that have happened to you this week that have been just like a predator. If you didn't get away, you would have been destroyed by now. This predator this deer was thirsty because it's always being pursued by a predator. And really, this is a metaphor for life. Can I teach you just a couple of metaphors about this illustration? Because he's thirsty because he's having to run from predators. He has to refresh himself so that he can be ready for the next predator that's going to pursue him on the next day or the next hour or a few minutes later. And it's a metaphor for life, because my brothers and sisters, there never will come a time in your life when you're not pursued. When something is not out to get you. I wish you could get that. See, you think that there's going to be good days. Now, my brothers and sisters, you might have some good days, but it's always going to be something out to get you. And listen, there's some things in life that has been eternally assigned to chase you until you die. In other words, people might start chasing you to kill you, to take you out. But there's some other things that have been put on your heels, and they're going to chase you until they get you. Let me give you just a couple of them. Sickness has been put on your heels. It's going to chase you until you die. Listen, death has been put on your heels, and it's going to chase you until you die. I got one more. Time has been put on your heels. And it's going to chase you until it catches up with you. Sickness, death, and time are like a cheetah that's chasing. And listen, all three of them make you pant for the brook, that flowing stream of water, so that you can be refreshed. The psalmist in this particular text says, I'm panting after the stream of water because of drought. And I need to do these two things because I'm trying to give a metaphor as a life lesson. He's running and panting and looking for a brook because of drought. Now this is shouting stuff. The thing about the drought, he can't do nothing about that. He ain't got no control. He doesn't have the belief of the Cherokee Indians that you can go and have ceremonies and offer sacrifices and dance to the rain gods and rain will come. This deer understands that he's a victim of circumstance. That the drought didn't have nothing to do with him, and he can't control when the drought comes or when the drought leaves. I need to explain to somebody, you can't determine when you're going to be up or down. You can't determine how things are going to play out in your life. To a certain degree, there are some things you just can't control. Do the best you can to try to control some things, but there are some things, and the deer could not control the circumstances that cause traffic. And then the thing about the predator, there's some things that just set against you. That's just natural and nature. You can't avoid them. I'm going to give you one of the things that Skip Heigl said, who's pastors Calvary Church in Canada. He said the problem with most of us, we think that everybody's supposed to like us. Every circumstance is supposed to work out to our advantage. And that we're supposed to win every time. And the reason why we believe that, Dora, is because we listen to these apostolic Pentecostal preachers who tell us that everything is supposed to work out to our favor. But let me tell you, my brothers and sisters, there can be some circumstances you can do everything right and everything wrong will be the outcome. See, I'm almost finished, but let me explain to you what verse I just told you. Verse 1 says, as the deer panteth after the water, or the streaming flow of water, so my soul panteth for you, God. Now, can I explain to you, I got to give the sons of Korah credit, because what they did realize that they were thirsty. They needed a stream of water, and they give a metaphor as a deer is seeking stream of water for refreshment. The psalmist at least had the right perspective, the right focus, and the right intentions. Because what they did was they felt empty and thirsty, and they had the right object to be filled. You'll get that on the way home. See, the problem is you're trying to fill your thirst with the wrong thing. You're trying to fill your thirst with what can't satisfy. You're trying to refresh yourself with things that can never satisfy thirst. You know, I'm really a nerd, and I was watching Nova, and it was giving a lesson on the human body and what it says. In this modern culture, we don't realize that the only thing that can satisfy thirst is water. But when you go into any convenience store, grocery store, they got everything in there but water. And other things are liquid, but they have content in there that literally feeds thirst, don't satisfy thirst. Yeah. And you got to know the difference between the beverages in the grocery store or in the convenience store. Not everything in there that's liquid is to satisfy your thirst, but the other, it is to feed your thirst. In other words, when you get through drinking it, you're more thirsty. The only thing that can really satisfy thirst is water, H2O. Because the water is what the body contains most of. Most of your liquid in your body is water and blood. You remember that when Jesus died on the cross, what came flowing from his right side? Blood and water. Because it was the blood from his heart, it was the water from the peritoneum sac that was surrounding his heart, and you need water. Because water is the only thing that can satisfy thirst. And so he says, as the deer panteth after the brook of water, so my soul panteth after the Lord. My brothers and sisters, there are some thirsts that only God can satisfy. If you don't get right with God, if you don't get connected with God, if you don't get plugged up with God, you will never be satisfied in life. He says, the deer panteth after water, but Lord, I panteth after you. The deer want more water, I want more.
More him.
Yeah.
More him.
Yeah.
Michael, if I had time, I'd explain to you that when the deer got to the brook, what he didn't do, he didn't bathe in the brook. He didn't try to clean up the outside of himself with the brook. He didn't wash with the water that was in the brook, but he got the brook's water inside.
Yeah.
I said, y'all got to know when to shower.
Yeah.
When he got to the brook, he didn't bathe in it. He didn't try to clean himself up. He didn't even try to cool himself down by sitting down in the water, but the water was going to be beneficial only if he got the water in him. You'll get it on the way home. And my brothers and sisters, you'll never be satisfied in life just coming to church. You got to get it in you. and you. Because listen, it's not enough to come to church. It's not enough to sit in these pews and hear the gospel and be in a church environment. You got to let the word and get God in you. You got to move at a time and a space in your life where you move from thinking that church membership is benefiting you and move to a relationship with God is the greatest need. I don't come to church to be at church because the church is in me, but I come to church to be poured into, to drink from the fountain of living water. I come to church to get some of this stuff in me. Coming to church don't change me. Coming and drinking from the fountains of living water. When that deer got to that water, he started drinking. Didn't puddle in it, didn't wash in it, didn't recline in it, but he started drinking from it to get what was in the brook in him. Says, and that's what the psalmist says. The sons of Korah, the Levites who led the worship, these men who were the leaders of the church, they were mentally and physically exhausted and depressed, on the run, away from the temple, with their king, not having access to the palace, the pleasures of the palace, food of the palace, the comfort of the palace. And these men says, we are thirsty. Not to be back in necessarily a location. We missed the temple, we missed the palace. But what we most of all miss is you, God. Amen. If you don't miss God, you're missing the wrong thing. And I can tell you at the end of this pandemic, and we about at the end of it, the people who are going to come back to church is not the people who miss church, but the people who miss God. People who want to be back at the brook because they are thirsty for the right thing. Do I have any witnesses in here? When you have a thirst for God, when you desire God, you don't miss the church, you don't miss Pilgrim Grove, you don't miss sitting in this edifice, this building, but you miss being in the presence of God. He says, and let me just give this verse 2, and I'm going to close, because he says, and so I panteth after you. That's the object of his focus. And he gonna mention in verse 4 the house of God, but that's not really what he's wanting. He's wanting that presence. He wants to be filled with God. He's desiring God. But then he says in verse 2, my soul thirsts for God. And boy, let me tell you, if I had time, I'd go into this for the living God. And he wanted to make sure he put that in there. Because see, we got gods, but they ain't living gods. We got gods, but they ain't gods that can talk back to us. You remember when Elijah was up on Mount Carmel and the priest of Baal had been praying all day that their God sent down fire to burn up the altar and the sacrifice, and Elijah just sitting there reclining, waiting until his turn, and about at the midday, and he said, well, maybe you need to send him a telegraph. Maybe he's on vacation. Maybe you need to speak a little louder. He might not can hear. He started mocking them because they didn't have the living God. In other words, they had a God, but it wasn't a God who was a living God. He was a God that they had made up, a God that was not of substance. And they had material gods that were restricted by time, space, and matter. But what he's talking about is I desire a thirst for the living God, the immaterial God that lives outside of time, space, and matter. The God who can be everywhere at the same time. Is the God who nothing is impossible for. There is not a rock that God cannot move. And he says, I thirst for that living God. And then listen, that's the God you want. The God that when you call him, he might not come, but he sure knows he is. And then he might not come when you want him, but he gonna be there. God's delay is never God's denial. He'll always show up in time, on time, even when you call him and it don't look like he's coming. He is coming because he does hear you, and he will show up according to God's people. He's an on-time God because he is the living God. He can hear and he can see. That's one of my favorite verses where it says in Psalm, the eyes of the Lord are in every place and his ears are forever listening to hear our cries. He says, I thirst for the living God.
Yeah. All right. Come on now. All right.
I thirst for the living God. And then he asked the question. At the end of verse 2. And this question is going to be asked time and time and time and time again in this verse. You're going to see the word when over and over and over and over. And if you skip over the verse to Psalms 43, you're going to see the word when. You're going to start out by asking that question, which is a profound question. When shall I come and appear before God? Now listen, that's where we have an issue. Now listen, this seems like, as the psalmist starts off by making his appeal to God and making his issues known to God, that God should have immediately responded. And these first two verses, which more gives the indication that this ain't the first time the psalmist has prayed this prayer or solicited this request to God. But it does seem like the psalmist is frustrated now. He is trying to plead to God's compassion, plead for God's intervention, ask God to come and help them in their despair. But it seems like the psalmist is not getting a response from God. And he is literally flattering God with platitudes. He's complimenting God. He's giving God all kinds of praise and wishes, because these were Levites, the sons of Korah, who knew how to praise. They knew exactly what to say to move the hand in the heart of God. But it looked like God wasn't responding even though they were whispering. I need to tell you, you can love the Lord, praise the Lord, but it doesn't mean God gonna move when you get ready for him to move. He'll move when he gets ready. And so the psalmist asked the question, when? And listen, if you ain't never asked the question when, you probably ain't been waiting. If you ain't never asked the question when, you probably hadn't ever prayed. If you've never asked the question when, you've probably never been in distress. But the psalmist asked the question when. Listen, I guess I got to close with verse 3 because it's really connected so close. Because now this speaks to y'all. And now if you ain't never had one of these days, then look at what this text. Look at what this text says. He asked, when shall I come and appear before you? My tears have been my food. Do I have anybody in here? My tears have been my. I got some witnesses in here. Ain't you been through enough? Ain't you been through some stuff? Ain't you suffered some loss? And ain't it seems like you said it can't get no worse and it got worse? And then you thought the worst was over and something else came? You lost, but you keep on losing. You step 3 steps forward, get knocked 4 steps back. And it seems like you cry more than you shout. You cry more than you rejoice. You cry more than you laugh. And the people saw that your tears was your food. And he really wanted to put an emphasis on just how bad it was. Because then he says, day. In other words, when you see me smiling, riding in my nice car, going to my nice job, don't let all of that fool you tears are my food.
Yeah.
In other words, I can go to work and still I'm shedding tears. And if you think that's something, I hide when the sun is out and the day is my circumstances. But boy, when I go home and shut that door and it ain't nobody there but me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes, yes.
I really want to bring home to you. Because see, some of y'all don't know what it means to cry this kind of tears. Because see, there's tears you cry because you're hurt. Tears cry because your heart is broken. Tears that you cry because you're happy. But these tears that he's describing in this particular text, these tears won't let you be hungry even though you're hungry. Won't let you eat even though food is sitting right there in front of you. These tears won't comfort you even when your family and children come around, and yet they can't bring comfort. And then and listen, and then I got to just say it, but this he says, because he asked God a question. Not because of his concerns, because there are folk who know that these sons of Korah, these Levites, are the worship leaders, and they know if anybody ought to have faith under pressure and in despair. Because Skip Heidel says the problem with most of us, we get discouraged because criticism that comes on the outside, especially for those of us who said we love the Lord. Because the question he asked, while they continue to say, you see where it says, while they continue to say, where is your God?
Yeah.
Oh, my brothers and sisters, I declare I'm closing with this one, because that's the question that you have to answer to the critics and to the cynics, to the church folk, and sometimes non-church folk. They want to know where he is. They see you crying, and they see you suffering loss, Gladys. And they know you come to church every Sunday, sing in the choir, and you love the Lord, and you love the pastor, but yet you have to experience tragedy after tragedy. And some Gentile, unchurched person will come to you and say, where is your God? Either you love him and you come to church every Sunday, but you go through stuff that it don't look like a saved person ought to go through.
Yeah.
And you go to work on Monday morning, they say, where is your Where is your God? Now, I want you to see what it said. It said they said. And he said they continue to say. And that word, every time they see it, they know you go through tragedy after tragedy, loss after loss, trouble after trouble. And they be asking you, where is your God? I'm going to answer.
Come on now.
I really don't have time, but I'm going to answer their question.
Go ahead.
So I was driving down from Tupelo this morning and left home. The sun was shining bright. I was excited. I asked the question, did I leave my shades? Because I do my walk down West Churchill every Sunday. And I wanted to make sure I had my shades to protect my eyes from the sun. But the further I got down the road, it became cloudy. So I had to take my shades off and put my glasses back on. And I said to myself, what a metaphor, a teachable moment. Now the issue is, was the sun there or was the clouds there? Because listen, that it would have been disappointing if the sun was gone. But the sun wasn't gone, it was just a cloudy day. The sun was there, hidden behind couldn't go. Now listen, I need to go and tell you this before I close, because let me tell you something. Now listen, the clouds did not keep the sun from shining. It just wasn't shining as bright. You're going to get this. Because listen, sometimes in your life, it doesn't mean that the sun ain't shining. It just ain't shining as bright today. Because I'm going to the funeral home to plan a funeral. It don't mean the sun ain't shining. It just ain't shining bright today. I got some issues, some struggles, some stuff going on. It doesn't mean that God is not there. It just means it ain't shining too bright today. I can tell you where God is. He's always where he's been. Old folk would say he sits high and looks low. Heaven is his strong, earth is his footstool. He sits high, but he looks low. And listen, I'm leaving the old folk and go to the young folk, because the young folk had the best song with the best theology to convey where God is and what God is doing. He got the whole world in his hand. He got the whole world in his hand. He never loses control. He's never out of control. He never doesn't know anything, but he knows everything at the same time. He's everywhere at the same time. There's nothing that can happen that he doesn't know about. He has numbered the hair on your head. He knows a sparrow when it falls. He has numbered the cattle on 1,000 hills. He arranges the sparrows to sing him a song every morning. God is still in control. And sometimes when my life is out of control, doesn't mean he's not still in control. Artificial intelligence. I used to own a Honda Genesis. And I used to love my Honda Genesis because when I was driving down 45, I would get sleepy and tired, and I put on the automated drive. And it would drive sometime for me when I was tired and in distress. And it was a fail-safe mechanism to help me do what I couldn't do sometimes.
Yeah.
And listen, I took overly advantage of it because I knew it was there. And it gave me a sense of peace because I knew that it was there and it could do what I couldn't do when I couldn't do what I could do. And see, that's where God is. He's there. He'll give you a sense of peace in the midst of. Though the storms keep on raging in my life. And sometimes it's hard to tell the night from day. My soul has been anchored in the Lord. Every eye closed, every head bowed. God is there. Where is God? I tell you, he's there. He's there all the time. In the hospital, he's there. All the time. The doctor has done all that he can do. He's there all the time. If you're here today and you don't know Jesus Christ, have not accepted him as your personal Savior, and by faith you can come. If you're here today, if you desire prayer, I want to pray for you right where you are. You might be that person who is struggling in your life. It might seem like you're in that time where you are in distress, you are being pursued by an enemy, you're living in a time of drought.